Hello everyone, and welcome to your 57th Cocoa programming tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to be continuing where we left off in lesson 55 and 56, and we're going to be talking about how we can accept drops into our NSTableViews. So this is where we left off in the previous tutorial. We had basically our application. We could drag items from the Finder into our table view like this, but when we let go, everything just flies back to their original source area. So if we drag them anywhere around here, let go, they don't actually insert into the table view. So that is what we want to be able to do, is we want to be able to accept drops into our table views. So yeah, let's talk about that. So this isn't actually too bad. We've done most of the heavy lifting at this point, so we should be in for a shorter tutorial if that's what you're looking for. So basically, to just cover what we've done already for dropping, we have two methods that we've dealt with dragging stuff. So both of these are from the NSTableView data source protocol. So the first one is this TableView validate drop proposed row proposed drop operation method. And basically, validate drop simply is checking the items that you're dragging in, saying, hey, can we use these items? If so, what kind of operation do we want to do? In this case, we're going to return an NSDrag operation copy if we can use those items. Else, we will give it an NSDrag operation none, meaning that we couldn't actually use whatever items we were dragging. So that is the first important part, is to validate the type of things that you're going to do, and make sure that you return a valid drag operation so that you can use the items if you want to. The next part is the update dragging items for drag, which is called when you can actually use these items, and it sorts out what items are valid in the drag, and then on top of that it will allow you to do the nice animation stuff that you want to do with when you drag them from the Finder and you want to rearrange them, so to speak, in the NSTableView. So that's what this method here is pretty useful for. And the next part to actually accept the drops is to add another NSTableView data source method called TableView accept drop row operation. Alright, so this method, again, you can look all of these up by holding down the option key, and it didn't work for that one yet, mostly because I haven't implemented it. But if you hold down the option key on any of these methods, you can click on this NSTableView data source and you'll be brought right to the section there. So if you scroll up to the top here, we can see a bunch of the drag and drop methods that we may want to use. And right now we're going to try and implement the accept drop row operation method. Alright, so what is this simply asking us to do? Well, quite simply, it wants to know if we can accept the drop, and we are going to say yes. So this assumes that validate drop actually returned a valid operation. So if you returned NSDrag operation none, in that case, this method will never actually be called. So you're safe in that department. You don't really have to worry about things not being accepted if you've already validated what you have. So you can return yes in those cases. There are cases though where you might not want to accept the things you're dropping, so you would return no. But in this case, we do want to accept that stuff. Alright, so there's two cases that also will arise from this accept drop method. So there's the case where we drag something from the Finder and we let go of it in the table view. That is, inserting those items into the table view. The other case is where we drag stuff from the table view itself and then we drag it somewhere else in the table view, which is rearranging the items in the table view, but it means that accept drop will also be called. So there's two sort of scenarios. There's this rearranging part, right, the reorder, or we're inserting new items. So we're going to make a separate method to deal with inserting new items into the table view, and in the next tutorial we'll talk about actually how we can use reordering, which is actually a little bit more complicated. Alright, so let's go ahead and make our method name. So we're going to make a method that will allow us to perform an inserting drop. Now you'll notice that the accept drop method here, this big long data source method, has a few nice things for us. So it passes the NSDragging info object to us, which allows us to enumerate through all the objects that we're dragging, right? This is the object that holds on to all of those things we're dragging around. And with that object, we can actually go through all those objects and look at them and do whatever we want. So this is an important object to use if we want to add the stuff that we're dragging around. We want to know this info. The next thing that we're going to need is the row, because the row is telling you where you're inserting this in the table, which is also very important. So this method that we're going to make is just going to take both of these things in. So we're going to have insert with drag info, and it'll be just the object of ns dragging info, and we'll just call it info, and then row, and it's integer row. All right, so we can go ahead and call this in our except drop. So we'll say self perform insert with drag info and row. Alright, so that'll call this, and now the whole point of using this method is so that we can actually deal with the details of how we insert these items into the row, right? We can tell it how we want to animate it, and more importantly though, we actually have to insert the stuff that we're dragging around into the backing NS array, right? The NS array that's holding all of this data for us, we need to add this information that we're dragging around into that array. So that's what we need to do most importantly in this method. Now, the really useful thing with this info object, right, is that we can use this method that we used earlier, which is this enumerate dragging items with options, blah, 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 method that's really long. And this allows us, though, to enumerate through all the items that we're dragging. So with that ability, it's really good because then we can actually add those items into the table view, and that's what we want to do. So we can, first off, going back to this, we need to create an NS array of all the classes that we're going to be able to insert. So we'll say NS array classes gets, and I'll use the nice new syntax for this, classes NS or whatever our object is called, the desktop entity class. Alright, so this is an array of all the classes that we accept, and we only accept the desktop entity class to be dragged into or dropped into this table view, so that's the only class that we want to look at. Then we can start to enumerate through all these things. So we'll say info, enumerate, dragging items with options. Let me just look back at what we had here for this other one. So we have 0 for the view, which is our table view. That's where we're dropping this stuff in. And we'll just use underscore table view for that. Again, we have a we have a property for that table view, so I can use underscore table view or self.table view. Classes is that array that we just made. Search options, I don't think we care about, so we'll just pass in nil. And then the block we'll want to use, so let's go ahead and use that. So what we want to do is we are going through all the objects in this info object, and we want to do a few things, right? So we want to get the object that we want to insert, so we'll get the entity out of the thing we're dragging. Then we'll insert that to the table contents, right? That's our NS array that's holding all that content. Then we insert it into the table view, and then last we will update what's known as the dragging frame on the drag item. So we'll cover that in just a bit. But let's go ahead and get a few things going here. So the first step is to get the desktop entity from the dragging in item. So the dragging item is this is the item that's being dragged around, and the dragging item has a property called whatever it is, item, I think, and that gives you the item that you're dragging around, and that is our desktop entity in this case. Alright, so the next part is that we need to actually insert this into our table contents. So we can say table contents, insert object, entity, at index, and now we have to figure out where this index is going to be for this object. Now you might be thinking, well, we could just use this index right here, and you can, but unfortunately this doesn't cover the case when you start to drag in items that aren't of the type that you want. So if, for example, I was dragging items in this case, we only accept photos. So let's say I drag in photos and a text file and a bunch of other things. Then this index only accounts for everything that we're dragging. But really, we don't want to account for everything. We only want to account for all the items that are of this class, right? We only want to account for the desktop entities. So we have to actually make a separate sort of counter outside of this block. So to do that, we can say _block, and this is similar to what we did here with the valid count, right? When we were working with the update dragging items, we made a separate NS integer outside of the block, and you can use the __ block notation so that you can actually change this value outside of the block, right? Or inside the block, but it keeps its value. So we want to simply make another, basically an index counter, so to speak. So we'll say NS integer, we'll call this insertion index, and we'll take the row to start. So the row, right, is where we start this insertion. So if we start the insertion at row 1, or index 1, whatever you want to think of it as, then that's where we're going to start our insertion index. All right, so that's where we're going to insert the first object, is at the insertion index. The next part is to actually set up the table view to get those changes. So you set the table contents to have the content. Then you also have to tell the table view that you're going to insert this as well. So we say insert rows at indexes, and this takes an NSIndex set. So NSIndex set, and then we can just make one with index set with index. And we're just going to pass in the insertion index. All right. Then the animation is the type of animations we want to have. So NSTableView animation. What types do we want to have? I can never remember what the actual name is. Yeah, so all the effects, I think, are what we want to work with. And then we want to add whatever type we want to add. So if you want to sort of create a gap effect where the table view will animate a gap and insert those items, and you can use that effect, and that will make a gap when it's inserting the items into your table view. You can play around with that a little bit if you want to see that in action. All right, the last step is to simply add or tell the frame for the dragging item where it's going to be going. So when we started this application, we had I should say, in the update dragging items for drag, right? This method here was where we did that nice little animation when we drag the stuff over the table view. Everything that comes from the Finder, it will nicely animate into this sort of new, view thing that, you know what I'm talking about when I'm dragging the items over the table view. They nicely animate into that little sort of list, so to speak, of items. So in this case, our job is to be able to take those dragging items and tell them where they're going to go. So that animation, when we hover over the table view, all those items need to know where they're going to animate to. So this is where we have to tell those items where their dragging frame is going to go next. So we can say dragging item, dragging frame, and the dragging frame is going to be in the table view, and a frame of cell at column 0, row, wherever we're going to insert it, which is, again, our insertion index. All right, there you go. And the last part of this is, of course, to increment the insertion index every time we finish running this block. So every time this block gets run, right, every time we're going over a desktop entity item, we need to increment the insertion index so that they are added sequentially in the table view and in our table contents as well. All right, so that is that, and that should be everything that we need to actually get drag and drop to work. So we can go ahead and run this, and here's our files. You can see that they animate, we let go, and a gap is created, and the items are added to the table view. So that's that. We still can't move items around in the table view, so we haven't got that ability yet. We can delete the items, that's still in there. We can add them right at the bottom. If we do that, there's no issues that will arise there. We can just animate them in, and they sort of animate down into the the abyss, but you can see that they also get added as well to that list. So that is how you can work with accepting drops into the table view. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any other questions on what we did in this tutorial, please leave your questions in the comment section below. But there really wasn't too much. We just have to first validate the drop, then you update the dragging items so that you have that nice animation. You accept the drop, so if you accept the drop, then you have to actually tell the dragging items where you're going to put them in. And so we made this our own little method here to do that. And we go over all the desktop entity items that we're dragging, and we insert them into the correct places that we expect them to be for our table view. All right. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Again, leave your questions in the comments below, and stick around for one more lesson, or lesson 58, where we will cover how to actually reorder items in the table view. All right. See you then.